the 25th anniversary of his election to the presidency, Bill Clinton sat down for an interview about his administration. He's joined by his wife Hillary, and they answer questions about foreign policy, the economy, and health care policy in the Clinton administration. From the Clinton Foundation in Little Rock, Arkansas, this is an hour and 40 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 26th Compurus Distinguished Lecture Series. This series was established with a very generous gift from the Compurus family, many of who are here today, as well as AT&T. And this lecture series is presented by the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton School of Public Service. And oh yes, please give the Compurus family a big hand. Will you all stand up so we can recognize you? I insist. Dean, come on, Dean, stand up. They're right here in the front. And I'd also like to say a very, very special word of thanks to our sponsors who are here today that really allowed us to make this 25th anniversary celebration possible. So thank you so much to our sponsors. Before we begin what I anticipate will be a lively conversation, I'd like to thank all of you as well for joining us today. This is the largest crowd we've ever had for a Compurus lecture. And as you can imagine, with this giant group, it would be nearly impossible to recognize all of our distinguished guests individually. So I'm going to ask groups of people to please raise your hand when called. Okay, you ready? If you are a current or former elected official, please raise your hand. If you served or volunteered during the '92 campaign, please raise your hand. I see a lot of hands out here. Now keep up your hands if you also served or volunteered during the '96 campaign. Oh. If you served in the Clinton-Gore administration, please raise your hand. And if you were or are part of the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Library, or the Clinton School of Public Service, please raise your hand. And for those who we have lost since 1992, let's all take a brief moment to honor their memory. This weekend, we've come together to celebrate a pivotal time in our nation's history, when Americans yearned for a president who put people first. And on November 3rd, 1992, they got one. And today, as we look back at the '92 campaign, what made it so groundbreaking and so special, not only to those of us who were part of it, but for the American people who were energized and enthusiastic about what this campaign stood for. For me, it started in 1991 as a volunteer for the Clinton Presidential Exploratory Committee at an old paint store on the corner of 7th and Chester. Among my many early assignments, I was asked to help senior campaign advisors with the necessities, like finding a place to live, a dry cleaner's, and perhaps more importantly, a liquor store. I also had the very high honor of driving Bruce Lindsay and Governor Bill Clinton back and forth to Central Flying Service. I took orders, as many of you in this audience have, from the General Sheila Bronfman. I dropped off David Wilhelm's laundry at the Razorback Fun Wash, and I made coffee, and lots of coffee. And you know what? I wouldn't trade any of it for a second. Now, shortly after I proved myself as a competent errand and coffee-making czar, I was officially hired by the campaign as one of the very first staffers. And one of my first assignments was to fill in and travel with Arkansas's First Lady, Hillary Clinton, on a few early campaign trips. Yes, that was pretty exciting, and you know what? That first trip really confirmed what I already knew about our state's First Lady. She was dynamic, highly organized, a little unconventional, and self-sufficient. She didn't really even need a staffer, and she didn't just listen to the people she met. She really absorbed what they said. I would watch her as she listened, and I knew that in addition to her genuine concern, she was thinking about real solutions. Like President Clinton, I grew up in a small town here in Arkansas. My dream was to work in politics like my dad, Alex Street, and many streets before me. And when I was 24 years old, Bill Clinton gave me that chance. I worked in the '92 campaign, I served 8 glorious years in the Clinton White House, and now I am back in my home state running the Clinton Presidential Center. Yes, thank you. And I can never really thank President Clinton enough for the amazing opportunity he's given me. I really pinch myself every day and feel so fortunate to have had the opportunity to work for both of these extraordinary public servants while being a wife and a mother and raising my 3 daughters with my wonderful husband in Arkansas, a place President Clinton and I will always call home. You know, we all share similar stories about the '92 campaign. And that's why we are here this weekend, to reflect, to celebrate, and to reconnect. And you know what? I can't think of a better person to lead this conversation than a one and only Ragin' Cajun, James Carville. His infectious enthusiasm, his unlimited supply of energy, his keen ability to coin a phrase like, "It's the economy, stupid," and that genuine Cajun accent. James Carville is a force of nature, and it was his unique ability to keep the campaign fired up, focused, and determined to win every step of the way. Now, will you please turn your attention here to the screens and enjoy a video we've made to commemorate a campaign that worked tirelessly to put people first. Thank you.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
This election is about change. Change in our party, change in our leadership, change in our nation. And that is why today I proudly announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
Don't stop about tomorrow.
Governor Clinton and wife Hillary took the campaign outdoors this bitterly cold New Hampshire day. They went door to door meeting folks and passing out campaign videotapes of Clinton.
I want you to send a message to this country about what kind of country we're going to have, about what kind of future you want, about what kind of leadership you believe in, and about how we can win again. What's your name?
My name's Kyle Demers.
How old are you?
8. How does it feel like to be president?
I don't know. I haven't won yet, but I hope it'll feel good. Will you ask somebody to vote for me? Tell them you saw me and I looked all right, okay? I think we know enough to say with some certainty that New Hampshire tonight has made Bill Clinton the comeback kid. I am proud to say to all of you here and to the United States, this is the next Vice President of the United States of America, Senator Al Gore of Tennessee.
The people of this country are hearing Bill Clinton's message. They're deciding to help the Clinton board ticket change this country and get our country moving forward in the right direction. Bill Clinton wants to put people first.
Put people first.
People are responding to the message of putting people first and making government work for the average working families for a change.
It's time to put the American people first, to invest and grow this economy.
People tell him things they don't tell anybody else. This is not unusual. And I think part of it is because they recognize somebody who has had honest struggles in his own life. And so when someone says something to him, he doesn't brush them off. He doesn't look beyond them. He listens to them. He will listen, and he will care, and he will try to help.
It's time for change. It's time for someone smart enough to know, strong enough to do, sure enough to lead, the comeback kid, a new voice for a new America. I nominate for the office of the President of the United States, the man from Hope, Arkansas, Governor Bill Clinton.
Arkansas proudly casts our 48 votes for our favorite son and my son, Bill Clinton.
And Ohio cast 144 votes for the next president. I still believe in a place called hope. God bless you, and God bless America.
That's man, number one. The next president, Bill Clinton.
We're going to get on these buses in a minute, and we're going to New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and Indiana, and Kentucky, and Ohio, and Illinois, and Missouri. And before we're through, we're going to go back to the heartland of America and into the hearts of America.
I'm going to ask you one last time. Will you help me change the future of America? Ladies and gentlemen, the next president, Bill Clinton! Bill Clinton!
Last 2 days, 10 cities, 9 states, 4,100 miles.
I'm not throwing in the towel, I'm just using it.
I also got 3,000 feet of construction fence. Okay. Advance is not sexy.
And I think we're going to win tomorrow. And I think that the governor is going to fulfill his promise and change America. And I think many of you are going to go on and help him. We changed the way campaigns were run. And people are going to tell you you're lucky. You're not. Ben Hogan said golf is a game of luck. The more I practice, the luckier I get. The harder you work, the luckier you are. I was 33 years old before I ever went to Washington, New York. 42 before I ever won my first campaign. And I'm happy for all of y'all. You've been part of something special in my life. Now, never forget the job done. Thank you.
You see this sticker I've got on? It says, I voted. I voted Clinton and Gore, and I was the first person in Texas this morning to vote for Bill Clinton at 7 a.m.
I feel happy. I've been smiling so much, and so broadly that my jaws hurt.
I went to work in the campaign of '82, and I've been home very little since.
I'm sort of numb. Still hard to believe. It was pretty good.
Where's Elvis? He's always late. Oh, excuse me. Prez Elvis.
Can you believe this?
Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. My fellow Americans, on this day, with high hopes and brave hearts, in massive numbers, the American people have voted to make a new beginning.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome James Carville, Secretary Hillary Clinton, and President Bill Clinton.
Thank everybody. Mr. President, Madam Secretary, one of the things that most I vividly remember was in New Hampshire when our poll numbers were dropping faster than the thermometer. We had a group called the Arkansas Travelers. How many travelers we have here? And I wish that the two of you could talk about what it meant to be in that environment and the things that we were going through, and to know that you had so many people back home here in Arkansas that love y'all so much.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank all of you for making this possible. It's true, as James said, our poll numbers are dropping faster than the temperature, and it was cold. And it was obviously part of a strategy, because I had already been warned by the White House that if I ran for president, my poll numbers would drop quickly and early in the primary. And so I was expecting it. I didn't know exactly how they were going to get it done, but I was sure it was well organized, and they would have plenty of people obliging them. So all of a sudden, all this is going on, and then this full-page ad appears in the Manchester Union Leader with 600 Arkansans, and I know younger people will find it hard to believe there were no cell phones, or they weighed 5 pounds. 5 pounds. And so 600 people from Arkansas put their phone number in an ad in the Manchester Union Leader and said, "Don't believe what they're telling you about our governor. Call us, collect. We'll pay for the call and tell you the truth." I'll never forget it. Then the Arkansas Travelers had already been there. Another 150 people dropped what they were doing, and most of them drove on their own to New Hampshire. And they put 100,000 drops on doors, and they turned it around. And the rest is history. So if it hadn't been for the people of Arkansas, there weren't enough of us to go around. We wouldn't have made it. So thank you.
Well, you know, New Hampshire in late 91 and 92, and it was a much shorter campaign. Bill didn't actually announce until early October, if you can imagine, October of 91. So it wasn't one of these endless, long, grueling campaigns. It started with a burst of energy. We flew to New Hampshire for the first time as a potential candidate and his team. And we found a really receptive audience of people who understood that we needed change and we needed the kind of energy and dynamism that Bill was representing. So we spent a lot of time between late October into January, early February in New Hampshire. And what James is talking about was a truly horrible moment. I had spent the day, Bill was there as well, at the Manchester Mall. And we'd been greeting people there, and just random people, whoever walked into the mall. I would say hello, introduce myself, say that I was obviously campaigning for Bill, ask for their vote, because the primary was about 48 hours away. And I got a really good response. People seemed to be very interested and positive, and you just felt like, hey, maybe it was turning around. Then we went back to the little hotel we were camped out in, And we had a meeting with our pollsters, and the pollsters said, you're just dropping like a rock. And you may not stay even in double digits. And I remember, James, sitting there thinking, well, that sure is not the way it felt. And I have to say, one of the big differences between 92 and certainly 2016 is you felt like you could connect much better and more deeply and more quickly with people. So I thought, okay, that's what the poll is saying, but it's not what I feel. And I said I'm going to bed because I didn't see what else we could do. We'd done everything we knew to do. And so when the primary came and Bill finished a surprising and high second, I was really hopeful. And one of the brilliant strategic decisions that were made in the New Hampshire primary came when, as you saw in the movie, Bill went out first and basically claimed victory, even though he had finished second. And it was just an explosion because he'd lost. But compared to what we thought was going to happen, oh, he had won big. And from that moment on, he had momentum and he had so much support. And I know there are some people from New Hampshire who along the way have helped us in so many elections and primaries. And the people of New Hampshire really sent him forward into the remaining contests.
Yeah, I also think it's important to point out, that it is true, as Hillary said, we finished second. Everybody thought we were going to finish fifth. And we went down and came back up. And my principal opponent, Paul Tsongas, was from a town that was 5 miles from the New Hampshire border. So he beat me like a yard dog in the first 10 miles of New Hampshire next to Massachusetts. On the whole rest of New Hampshire, thanks to a lot of people in this room, we won. And so when they said, the political press said, well, you lost anyway, I said, yes, I did. And I congratulate Senator Tsongas. Now let's see how he does when we get to Memphis. And it had the desired effect. It was great. So it was unbelievable. But New Hampshire was one of the greatest experiences, I think, in our lives. And the thing that I liked was people talked to you about real problems, real dreams, and they wanted real answers. They weren't interested in how well you could badmouth your opponent or what you could say. They want to know, what were you going to do to help them with their lives? And I will never forget it as long as I live.
Recently in politics, we keep hearing, well, the politicians say one thing and they do another. And the 92 campaign, as I recall, was pretty specific. It was called Putting People First. I think there was a sign that said, is the economy stupid? And you were very clear to the campaign and very clear to the American people that what you wanted to do was build an economy that worked across America. Nothing was any clearer. That was the promise you made. And I want you to, and Ms. Clinton, you can go along with this, also this too, talk about the 8 years that you were president and talk about the things that happened across America. So at the end of the day, when we had this sort of focus campaign that people call sloganeering and sound bites and everything, that you were really clear. If you look back, and let's talk about what happened to the economy and what happened to people all across America in that last 8 years. I think that's very important in this sort of moment of national cynicism that we have.
Well, first of all, we were already seeing 25 years ago the kind of thing that people were so upset about this time, which is very, very uneven levels of economic growth, both by income and also by region. So there was growing income inequality and lower mobility. And What I said was, if you give me a chance, we'll try to build an economy that puts you first, where you can all be a part of it. Then you got a responsibility to educate your children and then train yourself to do what's available. I can't repeal the laws of economics, but we can shape it so you can do better. And so our theory was, if we gave people incentives to invest everywhere, we focused on the future and then trained people for jobs we knew would grow in number, we could drive down unemployment and get rid of the deficit at the same time and grow the economy faster. So what happened? After 8 years, it was the only time in a long time that all quintiles of the economy grew together, that the bottom 20% of our people actually had their incomes increase in percentage terms as much as the top 5% and greater than the top 20%. Then that, because we grew the economy from the bottom up, African American families' incomes went up 32%, Hispanics 24%, overall 17%, and there was no interracial tension because we just grew it from the bottom up instead of from the top down. So everybody's incomes went up, and we did it together, and it's the only time it had happened in a month of Sundays. It was a hugely important thing, and obviously that's what I was hoping would happen again this time. That's the only thing that works. We proved that growing the economy from the middle out and the bottom up works, and trying to grow it from the top down doesn't. And I hate to see us go down that road again, because we're going to reach the same dead end we did before. It works to do it the way we did. Put the people first, they'll take everybody else along.
The other aspect of this, which I really thought was amazing, is in addition to growing the economy for everybody, by the end of Bill's 8 years, the budget was balanced, we had a surplus, and if we had continued the policies of the Clinton administration, we would have eliminated our national debt. Now, that seems almost impossible to believe. I was in the Senate in 2001, and all of a sudden, the new Republican administration said, well, you know, we've got a surplus. We need to give it back to the people, meaning the very richest of Americans. And so let's cut taxes, and then we'll go back and show you, maybe it didn't work before, but we'll show you that we can trickle down and have economic growth. And a number of us said, you know, why would we undermine the hard work of 8 years? Because remember, when Bill became president, he inherited an economy that had a growing deficit and debt. The prior 12 years had quadrupled the debt of America, more than at any other time in our entire previous history. And he was determined to try to reverse that because he believed, number one, it was good for the economy, and it was responsible, and it was what we should be doing for our children and our grandchildren. It was really, really hard. The economic plan, the deficit reduction plan, passed in each house by one vote. And not a single Republican voted for it, and instead, they beat the drum day after day about how this policy of raising taxes on the wealthy, of getting more revenue to be able to invest in our people by putting people first, was going to wreck the economy. And they were dead wrong. Now, we're hearing the same baloney today, right? And this is, you know, look, I know we live in a really speeded up world, but it is important to remember history and important to learn the lessons of history, not revisionist, made up, phony history, but real history. And we know how to grow the economy in a modern, globalized world. And it's heartbreaking when you saw the results, when you saw people getting ahead for the first time. More people were lifted out of poverty in Bill's 8 years than at any previous time in our history. And so believe me, it's frustrating, because if you try to live in the reality-based world that, I think is where we should live, making these points and not being able to get them across or have them believed, it's the fairy tale of economics that it's going to trickle down. We're going to make everything great. Yeah, we may be cutting Medicare and Medicaid and health care and make it more expensive to go to school and all the stuff that they're trying to do in Washington, but it's all going to work out. It's such nonsense. And I think the tough budget that Bill fought for, that he passed, that was really, really difficult, it didn't immediately kick in so that people didn't see the results quickly enough. And you all know in the 94 midterm elections, and then they shut the government down, and then he had to fight against them on every front to save Medicaid and Medicare and all the rest of it. But eventually, the facts were proven, and the results were seen. And I think there's a lot of important lessons to learn in those 8 years about how to get the economy going, how to have inclusive prosperity that we shouldn't forget. If we do, then we're just, back in the soup again.
I think since it's a little bit of a retrospective, I owe thank you to Al Gore here, because he did a great job, and he loved to crack this joke about breaking the tie in the Senate on the budget. He said, nobody else can say this. Whenever I vote, we win. He only voted when there was a tie. So it was great. Look, everybody is for change in general and against it in particular. And people like it when it works out, but if it requires any effort, you have to be prepared to pay a short-term political price. And I literally grieved for years that so many people lost their seats in Congress in 1994, because we were seeing the beginning of a pattern which has persisted, broken only in 1998 and in 2006. Thank you, Mayor Emanuel, when you ran the campaign for the Democrats in Congress then, but of our party not voting at midterm. But the truth is, it worked out pretty well for the American people. And last night I was watching CNN, and a little trailer came on and said, after they killed all these members of Congress because they voted not only for the budget, but for the Brady bill, background checks, and the assault weapons ban, that now 95% of the country supports comprehensive background checks, and 65% would support an assault weapons ban. And so that still doesn't mean that you could survive it voting for it. It all depends on who shows up. So one of the great things about the challenges we both face, I think, is in national campaigns and in governance in the White House, is to realize that between you and the people you're trying to put first, the further you move away up the totem pole, the more layers there are between you and the people, and the more difficult and challenging it can be to communicate. So you can't be undisciplined about it, and you can't be weak-kneed about it. You got to keep trying to break through, keep trying to break through. Never stop trying to explain, never stop trying to reach people. It's a big part of the job, and frankly, one that after I got in, I underestimated. I mean, I was governor, as my distinguished opponent, whom I came to love, said in '92, of a small southern state. So the idea of being in touch with all your people was natural and inevitable. When you're president, or when you're running for president, or when you're Secretary of State, it requires strenuous effort, often against forces determined to see that you can't communicate with people. So that was all very exciting. It worked out great for you, but let's not, change is not easy. And a lot of people check their careers at the door to make America a stronger, safer, fairer place. We also had, in addition to all that economic progress, 25-year low in the crime rate, a 33-year low in the murder rate, a 47-year low in the illegal deaths by gun rate of all kinds. And so if you listen to other people say, oh, it was just an accident of the economy. If you believe that, I got some land I want to tell you. So I thank all of you who made that possible.
So, Ms. Clinton, I want to go to your area, one of your areas of expertise. I think the economic successes of the administration are what people remember, but when I was going to the library, I noticed that there's this Mandela exhibit. And I wish that you could talk for a few minutes about some of the foreign policy successes we had and talk a little bit about Mandela and some other things, because I think there was some real foreign policy achievements that tend to get overshadowed by the economic achievements. So if I'd ask you to start off, and the President, please chime in.
Well, James, that's right, and I thank you for raising it, because if you look again at the 8 years, the United States played a major role in some significant foreign policy successes. Let me just name a couple. First, the Irish peace process. The Irish peace process would never have happened without Bill deciding that the United States was going to back it. And that happened because of the campaign. You know, when he was trying to get support and people were still trying to figure out who he was and what he had done in Arkansas, he had a meeting with Irish Americans led by a man we both knew from our law school years. And one of the requests was, if you get elected, would you be willing to play a more active role in trying to end the Troubles? And Bill said he would. And it was, again, a risky decision. I remember very well. He decided to give Jerry Adams, the head of Sinn Féin, which was seen in many ways as the equivalent of the IRA, a visa to come to the United States. And there was an enormous uproar of opposition from the English government, from our own ambassador in London, from people saying, no, don't do this. And I think Bill rightly said, look, you've got to take risks for peace. You don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with people with whom you have serious differences. He asked George Mitchell to be the negotiator. It went on for years. There was nothing fast and easy about it. He didn't tweet about it. He got to work about it, and he actually got it done. Another important action that was taken involved Europe, and it involved the Balkans. You remember the horrific war in Bosnia, where it was almost a precursor of some of what we see in the world today, where disinformation and the media are used to sow discord and set people against each other. And you'd had Serbs and Croats and Bosnian Muslims, the Bosniaks, living peacefully together. You know, Sarajevo hosted the Olympics a few years before. And then all of a sudden, you know, there was this intense effort to blame different groups and individuals within those groups, and a war started. And it was very difficult for the Europeans alone to figure out what to do about it. And again, you know, Bill said the United States, with others, not on our own, would try to end the war in Bosnia. The late Richard Holbrooke was the chief negotiator, and he did an extraordinary job in, you know, really cornering Milosevic. And they were able to craft a difficult resolution. Of course, it was hard, and there were still outstanding issues, as we saw later in Kosovo, when Milosevic began to deport Kosovars out of Kosovo. I went to the refugee camp and saw these people being, they'd been loaded onto freight trains, too terribly reminiscent of what had happened in Europe in the 30s and the early 40s under Hitler, and sent out of Kosovo. And again, Bill said, we're going to end this. And he ran a bombing campaign against Serbia, and he forced them to end their deportation. And Kosovo is an independent country. Now, they still have a lot of problems in the Balkans. Let's not kid ourselves. These are really difficult, terrible problems. He worked incredibly hard with his counterparts in Israel to try to come up with a solution to that very challenging set of issues. He was at Camp David with Prime Minister Barak and Yasser Arafat. We all remember the incredible photograph of the Oslo Accords being signed in '93 on the White House lawn. And from that moment forward, Bill worked to try to find resolutions and ending, conflicts with Jordan and creating more support for Israeli security and recognizing the desires of the Palestinians. Camp David got close, but not close enough. But it was a consistent, concerted effort. When you think about that time, probably one of the really bright spots, I think, for the world was the election of Mandela. And Mandela became a leader whom I list as among the most admired people I've ever met, and within my understanding of history, ranking right up there. He became a close personal friend, an advisor, a mentor, and his example of how to pursue truth and reconciliation is something that I wish more of the world would pay attention to. So there's many other things, but those are the ones that I immediately think about, and maybe you'd like to add some ideas as well.
Well, I wanted to just make a couple of points. First of all, since there's so many people here who not only helped to elect us, but helped us to govern, the only thing that compensates for the president being vulnerable to be blamed when the sun doesn't come up just right every day is that you get an unfair amount of credit when all the people who work for you do something good. So I want to thank everybody here. Hillary was talking about the Balkans. One person who played a big role in the Balkans was Wes Clark, who was Dick Holbrook's major aide when we were trying to do that. In everything that we did over 8 years, there were somewhere between 1 and literally 100 people who deserved major credit for the good outcome. And so I want to point that out. The people's willingness to serve in public office, which may go up and down depending on the way they perceive it as a good or not good thing to do, is very important and had a lot to do with it. So I wanted to say that. Second thing I wanted to say is Hillary made all these points and then talked about Mandela. Why do we love Mandela? Because he's not like what we don't like about today's politics, right? In today's politics, conflict is more important than cooperation. Attacking people and demeaning them and debasing them and dividing them is more important than treating them with respect and lifting them up. Mandela was in prison or house confinement for 27 years, and yet he always treated people with respect and tried to lift them up and tried to bring them together, and succeeded in doing it. Instinctively, I think most Americans who care about their country and its role in the world know that ever since the end of the Cold War, when the bipolar world of the former Soviet Union and the U.S. went away, and we could have fights without blowing each other up to kingdom come. Even with the rise of terror, even with the rise of all this, it's been more profitable at home and around the world for many people to act like our differences are more important than our common humanity. And most people who say, oh, that's wrong, I want people to work together and be reasonable and compromise. They may be, but they don't vote that way very much. You know? Why? Because sometimes we take our democracy for granted. We take our public servants for granted. We expect people to come and do it, and then election time comes up, and we want somebody that they think is just, you know, play into our fears or our anger or whatever. Don't do that. Because one of the things that I think everybody who's governed since the end of the Cold War has learned is the world is interdependent. We have to find a way to share the future. That means we have to have shared responsibilities, but we also got to bring the opportunity for economic growth to everyone, for personal opportunities for their kids, for mobility, for social security and cultural dignity. And so far, there are a lot of ragged edges, because we say one thing and vote another. And we were navigating all that. So I want you to think about that. We worked like crazy to try to bridge all these divides. The final thing I would say, which is not necessarily in our interest, but today when we're all celebrating, there's not much the United States can do to make peace in a place if the leaders in the local region don't want to make peace. You can help a lot if people are inclined to do the right thing. Then you can maximize the benefits and minimize the risks and help to pave the way, which is what I tried to do in all those situations Hillary mentioned and several others. But first you have to have, as the great American poet Carl Sandburg said, you have to have rich wanting. You have to want. You have to want this thing to work out. That's what I pray will happen for all of you and anybody you can reach. We can't let this country go away. We can't let our divisions eat us alive. We can't trash our democracy and rob our children, our grandchildren, and the world of the chance to do that. You have to want it. So,
I think one of my favorite moments of the campaign took place at the governor's mansion in Arkansas when we introduced Alan Temple Gore and named Al Gore your running mate. And talk a little bit about that, and I wish that both of you would address this, because I know it's something you're very passionate about, is you were identified with the issue of the economy. He was really identified with the issue of the environment, and talk a little bit about the environmental record and Al Gore, and also going forward. But people like my family who live in a vulnerable place like New Orleans are very passionate and very concerned about this issue, and I think it's worth elevating up there with the economy and foreign policy.
Yeah, I think today, people don't think that much about it. But it was a groundbreaking choice because we were the same age, from the same part of the country, in the same wing of the Democratic Party, and I picked him because he knew more about things than I did, certain things. I knew more about economics and education policy and sort of state-federal relations, and Hillary knew more about childhood development and education, but Al Gore knew more about information technology, nuclear and other defense issues, and the environment. I read Earth in the Balance when it came out. And I thought there's no point in having this job unless you're going to make a difference in people's lives and prepare for the future. So that's what we did. And a lot of people thought it would be a big mistake politically. But then when it was interesting, because when President George W. Bush ran for president in 2000 and picked Dick Cheney at the time he did it, he might He seems to be taking a different task a little bit now, but he was part of that neoconservative group. But the idea became more current that the president and the vice president should be in sync. And I think that's pretty important because there's a surprising number of presidents since the history, since our country began, who were unable to finish their terms. And therefore, you should pay a lot of attention to who the vice president is. I thought Hillary made a very good selection of Tim Kaine from Virginia as her vice presidential running mate, because they saw the world the same way, and because he had extraordinary executive experience and he always got things done. And I personally think we need more of that in Washington.
I wanted to just add on to that about the environment. You know, Al Gore has been a persistent prophet about climate change and about the risks that we face. And I really admire that the work he started as a senator, that he tried to continue as vice president. He still continues today. He has another movie out that is trying to change public opinion, and not only change public opinion, but change the decision-making of elected officials. So here's where we are now. When Kyoto was signed, and Al represented the United States at the signing of Kyoto, Al and Bill had great hopes that they would be able to persuade the Senate to go along, and those hopes were dashed. And it was a bipartisan dashing. You know, both Republicans and Democrats decided
98-0.
Yeah, 98-0. Doesn't get more bipartisan than that. And you know, there was this idea, which Al was so committed to trying to disabuse people of, that somehow trying to deal with the very threats of climate change would be bad for the American economy. And both Bill and Al tried during the 90s, despite a big resistance, to make that case. And then in the years after that, there was a brief moment under George W. Bush when we thought we could make progress on climate change. I traveled around with John McCain, for example, and we went and actually looked at melting glaciers. We went to Svalbard, the northernmost inhabited place in the world, to talk to their scientists, and we went to Point Barrow in Alaska, and McCain really tried to put together a group of Republicans to work with Democrats on these issues. But here's the lesson. You know, climate change is one of those issues that a lot of people care about, but it's not their number one issue. It's like gun violence. A lot of people really care about it, wish we would do something about it, but not everybody sees it as their number one issue. So if you have a really determined, well-funded minority view that does nothing but try to prevent you from taking action on something like climate change, it's hard to make it a voting issue. And what happened when President Obama came into office, and I was honored to be Secretary of State, is we decided we were going to try to make it a voting issue. We were going to try to do something about it. And I went off to Copenhagen, and we made a commitment that the United States would be willing to help fund climate science research, help fund mitigation efforts. The president joined me there. We had a really contentious meeting. It was incredibly difficult. The Chinese and the Indians and the Russians and others were not interested, but we eventually pounded out an agreement, and we got the first agreement post-Kyoto, because nobody was going back to Kyoto, because everybody knew that the developing countries were growing faster and they had to be part of the solution. But we hammered out agreement, and then in subsequent years, more and more agreement was reached until finally we got to the Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement really was the culmination of so much of the work of so many people, including and most notably Al Gore. And of course, along comes the new administration, and they pull us out of the Paris Agreement, and we are now the only country in the world not in the Paris Agreement. Even Bashar al-Assad, when he takes time off from, murdering his own people, decided he would join the Paris Agreement. So we're the only one left. And we are losing economic opportunities. And this is what is most frustrating, because even back in the 90s, we tried to green the White House. We tried to do things that would demonstrate some, personal leadership. And we also, thanks to Bill and Al, made the case that this was an economic opportunity for America. So we're out. The fossil fuel guys are supporting Trump and the Republican Party, and they are more than happy to prevent us from doing anything. And guess what? The Chinese have decided they will dominate the renewable industry. They will be the primary exporter. So all these actions have consequences. And I really do, as I said in the beginning, give Al Gore a lot of credit for not giving up and never throwing the towel in, as frustrating as it must be for him. And, right now he's over in Bonn and with a bunch of, American governors and members of Congress who are telling the world, hey, some of us still understand what the stakes are, and we're not going to give up either. So the environment was an important flashpoint, and oftentimes people forget about the many struggles that the Clinton-Gore administration had.
So, Madam Secretary, one of my favorite in your long resume, one of the things that always kind of grabbed me is that you helped found the Children's Defense Fund in Washington. And the President and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think one of the great underheralded accomplishments of the administration, and I know you were very involved in, was the CHIP. And right now, as I understand it, there is a funding crisis that this program is going on. If you could please talk a little bit about children in the United States and also CHIP and what it means and why it is so important that this program continue.
Well, I have to say that my commitment to children's health really took off here in Arkansas when I got involved with the Arkansas Children's Hospital. And I was so proud of what happened with the hospital starting in the very first term of Bill's governorship, when the hospital wanted to grow so that every child in Arkansas would be taken care of regardless of ability to pay, and that we'd have the most sophisticated tertiary care that you could possibly provide. And with Bill's leadership, with the legislature's leadership, there was a great partnership between the state and Children's Hospital, and we watched it grow and flourish and take care of so many children. And so I saw firsthand what a difference it made, and certainly with my own daughter, I saw how important it was to have the confidence and the support you needed as a parent to make sure your child was taken care of. So when Bill asked me in '93,
the 25th anniversary of his election to the presidency, Bill Clinton sat down for an interview about
'93 if I would work on health care. I foolishly said, oh, I'd love to. I mean, really, I can't imagine anything more important than taking care of people's health care. I remember we had a governor's meeting shortly after that announcement was made, and Mario Cuomo, who was still governor of New York, came and he looked at me and he goes, your husband's just put you in charge of health care. I can't tell. Does that mean he loves you or hates you? And we all know what happened. It was incredibly controversial, but it laid the groundwork for what we eventually were able to achieve, both with CHIP and with the Affordable Care Act. So after we were unsuccessful with health care reform writ large, I was determined that we would at least take care of kids, because during the time I was working on health care, I traveled the country. I met with so many parents. I'll just tell you a real quick story. I was at the Children's Hospital in Cleveland, and I was meeting with parents who had children with chronic diseases but who were uninsured. And we were sitting in a conference room, and they were each telling me their story. And I got to a man who said, I have 2 daughters with cystic fibrosis. He said, I'm a successful businessman. I've built my own business. I could afford insurance, and nobody will sell me a policy. I said, well, what do they say to you when you go and ask them to help you bear the cost of caring for your two daughters? He said, well, I'll tell you what the last insurance company I met with, what the agent told me. He just looked at me as I explained to him what we were up against. And he said, you don't understand. We don't insure burning houses. And the man I was talking to had tears in his eyes, and he said, they called my little girls burning houses. I never, ever got that image out of my head. So I went to Ted Kennedy and talked with him about trying to figure out some way to cover kids. He, with the mastery of the Senate that he always displayed, brought Republicans on board, including Orrin Hatch. We worked to create a bipartisan children's health insurance program that was a partnership between the federal government and the states. It helps take care of 9 million kids a year. And it primarily, not only, but primarily deals with families that are working families, or even really successful families like the man I met in Cleveland, whose employer-based health care doesn't insure them because of pre-existing conditions or because they hit their lifetime limits. And they're certainly making more money than would make them eligible for Medicaid. So they were in that, no man's land. So we got it passed. And every year since Bill signed it into law, these 9 to 10 million kids have been taken care of. And I have to tell you, I've done probably a dozen book signings on this most recent trip, and all through my campaign beforehand. People come to my book signings or had come to my campaign events to thank me for CHIP. Yesterday in Austin, today in Little Rock, people came and said thank you. And one young man said, I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for CHIP. I had cancer as a child, and we ran out of money and we ran out of insurance, and thank goodness the CHIP program was enacted. So under President George W. Bush, under President Barack Obama, CHIP was reauthorized, and the program continued seamlessly. Well, this Congress and this White House have not reauthorized the program, and states are starting to run out of money because, as I say, it's a partnership and they rely on the federal dollars. So by the end of the year, unless it is reauthorized and unless the funding is provided, 9 million children and their families will be facing some very, very dire circumstances. So I can only hope that maybe at the end of the year there'll be some sort of a deal that will provide that continuity. But it's a program that I am very grateful for, that I had some small role in because of the lives it's saved and the futures it's given to so many kids. And it's the kind of thing we should do to take care of each other and to give every child a chance to live up to his or her God-given potential.
Mr. President, 50 years from now, I think the thing that, the economic achievements, the foreign policy achievements, the environmental, I think the thing that you'll be remembered for more than anything else is the Human Genome Project. I really believe that it would have happened. And talk a little bit about that, and it was funded, and what it is and what it can potentially mean to these young people here and their children and on into the future.
Well, first of all, I think one of the most important jobs of the national government is to keep America on the cutting edge of pioneering research and development. And I think that while we were getting rid of the deficit, determined to balance the budget, I wanted to keep us doing that. So I spent $3 billion of your money to sequence the human genome in a big multinational scientific research effort. And then we made a private partnership with Craig Venter, who was pursuing his own private sector sequencing, because I felt that it would have a major impact on the quality and length of life for the next generation and for hundreds of years to come, assuming we can keep from blowing things up. And so we did it. Now you can get a genome analysis for considerably less than $3 billion. And we know that there has been well over $200 billion of economic activity generated out of that. So your rate of return on your tax dollar investment was about the highest we've ever gotten in the United States for that $3 billion. And so what do we know? We know that there are certain genetic variances which put women at high risk of breast cancer. So we know which women should start taking tests earlier. We know we can, pretty soon we'll have the capacity to send every mother of a young female baby home with basic genetic information. We're learning, we're very close to unlocking the mysteries of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other things. So it's really important. And yes, I agree with you that it matters a great deal. But it's not the only thing. I also made in 5 minutes a decision to put GPS into the public domain. That made a huge difference. A lot of people didn't want to do that. 20 years ago, we started the first cybersecurity unit in the national government, and we should have kept it going. Last year, Israel got half of all the private capital in the world in capital investment in cybersecurity. That should bother you, because even though they're our allies, the United States should be way, way ahead of that in cybersecurity investment. And Congress wasn't all that interested in it. But this is a very big deal. We spent the first $500 million of your money, this was all in bipartisan way, by the way, in nanotechnology. And one of the most interesting days I had when I was out campaigning for Hillary was in eastern Kentucky, in the middle of Appalachia, in the easternmost university, Morehead State. They asked me to take a while to look at their nanotechnology program, which they were doing with NASA. With the first $500 million and its successors, we got appropriated. So they're building in eastern Kentucky, in the middle of what used to be coal country, 8-pound satellites for $1 million apiece that'll do most of what those $400 million satellites will do. So I went to see this young guy who was clearly supporting her, probably at risk to life and limb where he was. So he's putting all the nanotechnology for this satellite into a little box about 1 inch cubed. And I said, "What's that box made out of?" And this kid in his hillbilly twang looked at me and said, "Tungsten." He said, "Tungsten does real well in outer space." I said, "How old are you, 19? Where are you from?" "All right near here." And so we talked, and I was on the way out. He said, "Wait a minute." He said, "Mr. President," he said, "could I tell you one more thing?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Tell Hillary not to take it when people make fun of her for saying she's going to put up 500 million solar panels." He said, "Actually, I think she's a little low." I said, "I am not in the United States. I am not." And I said, "Why do you think she's a little low?" He says, "Because before you know it, we'll be making solar panels with 3D printers, just like I made this little tungsten container. And when we do, they'll be cheap as dirt and just as good, and we'll all be free." I thought to myself, now why am I telling you this? Because that young man did not feel the walls closing in on him. He felt the walls opening up. So he voted for the person he thought would open the most doors, not the people who would build the most walls. Now, wait. Why am I telling you this? Because I tried. Look, I tried not to do anything stupid in 92. I wanted to get elected. I tried to find a way to say whatever I was going to say that I knew might be dangerously unpopular. But I did try to level with people and tell them we could not roll back the tides. We ought to be going with the future and building a future we could all share. And we had to be both responsible and opportunistic if we wanted to build a future we could all share. But at the time, it was easier. I mean, we put out this little booklet. And in fairness, Paul Tsongas put out a little booklet, you remember? So you had to have, you had to be kind of a nerd if you supported Tsongas or me. And we got over 60% of the vote between the two of us in a 6-person race. Why? Because people realized then they were actually hiring people to do a job. And it made a difference if you knew anything. And, it was really important. You weren't being hired. I mean, and I owe it to a lot of these people from Arkansas. We had 1 month in the previous 8 years, only one, where our unemployment was below the national average until the year I ran for president, and we led the country along with Nebraska in job growth every single month of 1992. It takes a long time to turn an economy around. The same expert that said we had the worst school system in the country in '78 said in 1992 we had one of the two most improved school systems in the country, thanks in no small measure to Hillary's work on that. And the other state was South Carolina, and I made Dick Riley Secretary of Education for 8 years. In other words, we thought these were jobs, and our job was to create more kids everywhere without regard to race or religion or gender or identity, like that kid in eastern Kentucky making the nanotechnology satellites. So, I want you to think about that, because they say that Snapchat's 10 seconds. I felt like a great moral victory had been won for civilization when Twitter announced they were going from 140 to 280 characters. I thought, oh, the nerds of the world can rejoice. Those of us who love, you're laughing. And I want you to laugh, but I want you to think. Being president is a job. You hire somebody to do a job. You have to say where things are, where you want to go, how you propose to get from here to there, and how we're all going to do it together and benefit together. You have to put people first, but it's more than a slogan. You got to have some idea about how to get there. And I consider it the greatest honor of my life that, first of all, I had this laboratory of training as a governor here for all those years. And secondly, that I got to start at a time when grassroots politics still mattered, and when people listened to each other, and they didn't just want to think of some new put down. And it wasn't a question of whose resentment was better than somebody else's, it was who had better answers. And in the end, if you believe in putting people first, you have to have an other-directed politics. It may not work for the people who are communicating for you in the political media. That may not be the most financially remunerative or emotionally successful strategy, but in the end, that's what counts. And I'm proud of her for getting caught trying to put people first for the rest of our lives together.
So, I think there's an elephant in the room. And knowing me, if there's an elephant, it's this. We talked a lot about children. And I think one of the real values that all of us that have been privileged to be associated with you is that we earnestly believed and earnestly taught our children that life was a struggle, but at the end of the day, if you prepared, if you worked hard, if you were willing to accept risk, and if you understood that there were setbacks in life, that you would ultimately achieve your goal. This has been a hard year for parents. So try to help us and help these young people how we talk about these things in light of the events a little over a year ago.
Well, I wrote a book, What Happened, and it's really a book about resilience, personal resilience as well as national resilience, because I do think everybody gets knocked down, and the real question is, are you going to get back up? And not everybody will lose a presidential election, but everybody will suffer loss. And so the core of the message, James, that we were told and that we try to tell our kids remains absolutely true. You have to find ways to overcome disappointment, to find strength. And for me, it was my family, my friends, my faith. It was a lot of long walks in the woods, yoga, alternate nostril breathing. I highly recommend it. It was also, cleaning my closets, jobs that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, reading a lot of mysteries because the bad guy always got it in the end. But trying to fall back on the consistent message that I certainly got from my parents, and that I've tried to impart to my daughter, and will likewise try to do the same with my grandchildren. Life is not always fair. The struggle doesn't always go the way that you hoped or planned, but life is too short to give in to the kind of disappointment or despair that comes with losing or with suffering some kind of setback. And so for me, it was getting back up and taking stock of where I was and where I thought the country was. Because I think also in this particular case over the past year, the country, at least a majority of the country, has similarly felt that something went amiss. And what I've tried to do, I've got a new organization called Onward Together, is to support individuals and groups that are really harnessing a lot of the grassroots activism and energy that is out there to try to push back against some of the changes that are being imposed from Washington and ultimately win some elections. And I was really heartened by what happened in Virginia about 10 days ago. So I think the general message remains the same, but I also think that we have to be willing to kind of pick apart everything that led to the defeat in 2016. And I try to do that in this book because obviously I talk about the shortcomings I had and that my campaign had, and ultimately I am responsible because it was my name on the ballot. But there were other forces at work, and it was like a perfect storm. there was a lot that was happening that, was unprecedented, whether it was the intervention by the FBI at the last minute for no good reason, or Russia, which we're learning about more every single day, or suppressing the vote. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the country unfairly prevented from voting, even though they're just as much a citizen and just as registered and just tried as hard as they could, but couldn't cross the barriers that have been erected since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. So when I talk about what happened, I'm very focused on making sure it doesn't happen again. So that's why I am speaking out and going to continue to speak out, and I'm going to do everything I can to try to have an election in 2018 that's about real things. This has been one of the challenges for Bill and me. I'll be just very clear about that over the last several years. You've heard him talk about how much he loved getting out around Arkansas, listening to people. I was with him every step of the way. When I did the education standards, we held hearings in every county in the state. I mean, we were so in touch with and able to listen to thousands and thousands of Arkansans and, try to take that on board and figure out, okay, what are we going to do? But we also had a clearer channel for communication. Unfortunately, our body politic's immune system has been impaired because there has been a concerted effort starting with the creation of the Fox network. It wasn't there when Bill first ran. It was one of the reasons he probably survived. It was there when he ran the second time. It and all of its, associated media outlets who are by no means delivering news, they're delivering partisan advocacy positions, irrespective of the truth, the facts, the evidence. And I think we've got to stand up, regardless of what party, regardless of our own ideological beliefs. A democracy depends upon an informed citizenry that has access to accurate information. And I will tell you that there is no such thing as an alternative fact. It does not exist in politics or in nature. And it was astonishing to me, the things people believed about me in this campaign. And some of my Arkansas Traveler friends and other friends of mine from literally my childhood to adulthood and all of the places that I've lived and worked, and they were out there knocking on doors and calling people. And they would run into folks, or they'd get somebody on the front porch, and they'd say, I'm here campaigning for Hillary Clinton. I've known her since 6th grade. I went to law school with her. I worked with her at the Children's Defense Fund, whatever they were identifying themselves at. And I would like you to support her. And more times than you could believe, they would get an answer like, well, I can't support her. She killed somebody. I can't support her. She runs a child trafficking ring in the basement of a pizzeria. And my friends would be totally bewildered. And they'd say, no, she didn't. I know her. I've known her for decades. No, she didn't. Oh, yeah, I saw it on the internet. And now we know that Russia was sending a lot of those messages on the internet. They were weaponizing information, stealing information, providing phony news. So there's reason to be disappointed and reason to feel like, we didn't succeed, and that's hard to live with, very painful. But there's also a call to action. We cannot let our politics be turned into a fiction that benefits a very small minority of Americans. And I You know, I'm going to keep speaking out. Apparently, you know, my former opponent is obsessed with my speaking out. Apparently, there was another, somebody told me, tweet today. Honestly, between tweeting and golfing, how does he get anything done? I don't understand it. So maybe that's the whole point. But yes, resilience is the key. And it's not only the key for individuals, it's the key for our country. And therefore, we have to take every election seriously, not just presidential elections. We need to vote in every election. This 2018 election is going to be really, really important for our country. And, you know, the best antidote to disappointment is to keep fighting and keep working and be successful. And that's what we intend to do on behalf of the country that we love and that, you know, we've tried in our own ways to serve over all these years.
So I'm going to turn to the man from hope, the peddler of optimism, the man that's always looking, don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Talking about tomorrow, tell us at this hour of our despair why you believe America's best days are still ahead of it. And I know you believe that. You've always believed it. And what do we do? How do we make sure that happens?
Well, first of all, we are the best positioned country in the world for the future. So if we screw this up, it will require a lot of willful blindness. And look, in the last election, she won the popular vote. And it would have been, and if the voters, we have a slight disagreement about this, about what really happened. If the voters hadn't been told that the email, the first email issue, was the most important issue since the end of World War II, I doubt if the FBI director could have swung the election at the end. I think it was, you know, we all got to get back in harness here and try to get ourselves a basic framework beyond which we will not go in arguing these issues so that we're not just out there in la-la land. But I'll tell you why you should be optimistic. Because having lost it, I can tell you youth matters. And we are one of the youngest big countries on earth. You should be optimistic because we have so many immigrants, because like every other wealthy country, the birth rate among our native-born is going down to barely replacement level. So in order for us to continue to grow and get active in new economic areas, we have to have more young people. You should be optimistic because notwithstanding what you're told, if you count the documented and the undocumented immigrants in this country, the crime rate is 1/2 that of the native-born. You should be optimistic because we have people here from everywhere, and if you count all the terrible things that have been done by Muslims expressing violent resentment about aspects of American life in the modern world, their murder rate is 1/3 that of the native-born. Now, we got to stop this silliness and get down to the lick log here. If you want to just indulge resentment, you can. The problem with the people who didn't vote for her and don't listen to me anymore and think I'm, you know, gone over to the dark side, is that they live in places not with a lot of immigrants or a lot of Muslims or a lot of people who have been transgender or a lot of anything else. They live in places where there is not enough mobility, because there is not enough investment, because there is not a national network of broadband that puts everybody in the global economy, because nobody will stand up there and say, yeah, our differences matter, but what we have in common is way more important. The genome, which James Carville started with, he said, this will be my greatest legacy. You know what every one of you should know about it? It doesn't matter if you can figure out how we can all live to be 120. Remember this, every non-age-related difference in this vast crowd today, every single one, is rooted in 1/2 of 1% of your genome. Now, there are 3.6 billion genomes in a body. So even 0.5% is a substantial number. But it's peanuts compared to the 99.5% that we all share, without regard to gender or race or body shape or eye color or you name it. Why then must we obsess for 99.5% of the time about the 0.5% of ourselves that are different? Why shouldn't we spend just a little more time? If we really put people first again, we would think about how we could share the future. But I'm optimistic about America because of our diversity and because of what we did in the genome, because of where we are in science and technology, because we rank first or second in the world among all advanced countries in the ability to fight climate change by generating energy from the sun, the wind, and other clean sources. Because you name it, just name me one single solitary thing. We're leading the world still in material stuff. We got more than enough juice to get back in the front of the pack on, internet security, all this information technology stuff. The only thing that's getting in our way is our stupid politics. Our insistence on putting, special interests ahead of the general interest, on deciding when we will go and when we will not go to vote based on whether we feel enthused. And I feel, look, this is mostly a problem for my party, and I am unsympathetic. Thank you very much. Stop griping when they take your votes away. Stop griping when they redistrict your congressional district and your state representative district. If you had showed up at midterm in every one of these elections, it probably wouldn't have happened. And so, do I approve of it? No, I don't approve of it. I think it should be illegal and unconstitutional. But we are getting in our own way. We could build the most modern infrastructure of any country in the world, and interest rates are still low. We can build alliances around the world. We can tweak our trade agreements if they need improvement, but we shouldn't run away from the rest of the world. That's what I think. You should be optimistic. We're the best positioned country in the world. All you got to do is have a politics that thinks about the future of these children here instead of whether you can win a cheap shot by driving a stake between Americans in the short run.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I don't feel strongly about this.
There's 2 points that I want to make before we leave, and to me they're very important. The first one is, on the way over here, I got a call from my best friend, best political advisor, Paul Begala, who reminded me that they do, Gallup or someone does a survey of the most admired women in the country. And the person who has won that survey most often in all of its existence is one Hillary Rodham Clinton. So, I kind of thought you would like that. That is my favorite statistic. I came to this morning, and then I was on the phone and doing research, and then I came in, I talked to the president. So I think I'm right. I will probably be fact-checked on this, but I think I'm on really solid ground. In the last 35 years, a Clinton has run for public office, has put themselves before the voters 18 times. President Clinton, 11, Secretary Clinton, 7 times you have run. Do you know of the 18 times how many a Clinton has gotten the most votes? That would be 18. Nick Saban couldn't do that. Okay? You are in 35 years, you are 18-0. So I got to tell you this, somebody somewhere out there really loves you guys. That's a heck of a record. So.
James, could I before we close, I just want to say a really heartfelt word of thank you to our team here at the Presidential Center in the library. I want to thank everybody, but in particular, I want to thank Bruce Lindsay and Stephanie Street and Lena Moore and everybody who works for them and with them. In a minute, we'll hear from Skip Rutherford. I want to thank Skip and the great team at the Clinton School. We are really proud, really proud of what the center and the library and the school are doing. And we didn't want the time to pass without thanking, and of course we want to thank the Campuras family, who've been friends of ours for a really long time, for sponsoring the lecture series.
And I want to say, we're very reluctant to start recognizing people. We've already mentioned the Arkansas travelers. Thank you for going not only to New Hampshire, but to Georgia, to Florida, Missouri, and other places. There are a lot of people here who were in that 92 campaign. David and D.G. Wilhelm, Frank Greer, and Stephanie Solang. Thank you very much, Harry Thomason, for coming back from California. And everybody was in that 92 campaign. It's different now. But one thing shouldn't be different. We should still be able to talk to our friends and neighbors about things that are about their lives without having people whose sole goal is to gain power by discrediting, disabusing, confusing people, and abolishing the line between fact and fiction and truth and lie, triumphing. So if you want to think about something for next time, think about how to get people to vote at midterm, and then think about how the next generation can do a better job than I could anymore in a Snapchat, Twitter world, to create space to remind people, as my great Uncle Buddy used to say, when people make you mad, they're trying to stop you thinking, and there's something to be said for thinking. So I want to thank you all, and just let you know that if you don't stop thinking about tomorrow, and you never forget that we got to go together, and you never forget that our racial diversity makes us smarter and better, that our gender diversity makes us smarter than better, that our ethnic diversity makes us smarter than better, and that diverse groups of people make better decisions than lone genius or homogenous groups. Don't forget that. Now, I was thinking about all the people here who've been press spokespeople for me. They were always saying, "What's your crazy boss reading today? And what in the hell does that mean?" Excuse me. But that's what I want for you. Ask yourself how you're going to keep score as we claw our way through this mess. Look at your kids, look at your grandkids, look at the young people here. All that matters is whether people are better off when you quit than when you started, and whether those kids have a brighter future. And to do that, people have to be coming together instead of being torn apart. As one of Hillary's favorite phrases, all the rest is background music. Play the main theme. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Thank you.
Please welcome Skip Rutherford, Dean of the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service.
Thank you, President Clinton, Secretary Clinton, and James. It's always great having you back. I want to thank you, Clintons, not only for your candor, but for your inspiration. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful program. I want to thank the Clinton Foundation and AT&T, and special thanks to the Compuris family, whose generous gift honoring your parents made this lecture series possible. We owe you guys a big deal. Thank you very much. And Secretary Clinton, as I think back to 1992, I want to say on behalf of Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, I want to say on behalf of the Arkansas Single Parent Scholarship Fund, and I want to say on behalf of the many families that you touched through bringing Hippie to Arkansas, and from a personal perspective of serving on that board with you, for the thousands of children that are alive and thriving because of that intensive care nursery that you brought to Arkansas at Arkansas Children's Hospital. And tonight when we drive home and you drive by Children's Hospital and you see those lights on, there are 30-plus children living because of Hillary Clinton's work in Arkansas. So from that paint store on 7th Street to 1200 President Clinton Avenue, these 25 years have been one heck of a ride. And for the next 25 years, Mr. President, Madam Secretary, just know that it will be Clinton School graduates who will be putting people first all over Arkansas, America, and the world. Thank you all for joining us. Have a safe trip home.
Thanksgiving Day on C-SPAN. Here are some of the highlights.